Hello and welcome to Chill Time, Happy Time. I'm Jake.
I'm Abby.
I'm JD.
I'm Rosie.
And I'm Danny.
And today we are going to talk about Pride in honor of Pride Month, which is going on. So we're going to get into the history. But before we do that, please check us out on our socials. We got Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check us out at Chill Time, Happy Time. Also, we have a website, chilltimehappytime.com. So you can check us out there as well.
Please visit us there.
It has our addresses on it, so...
No, it doesn't. You will not find us.
Well, all right. Hey, guys, I would like to wish everybody out there listening today a happy Pride Month. And tonight, your episode will be led by me, Danny, or as they refer to me around here, the intern.
Where's my Starbucks, Daniel?
Listen, it was a long
Danny
ride.
came back after a long trip, got all of our orders wrong. It was terrible.
Yeah, we got to go to a break.
Skinny half-calf caramel macchiato with extra... I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Extra, read all about it.
All the extra.
I don't think it's that much to ask for almond milk. I mean, come on.
Well, anyway,
Well, they charge you extra for that.
if you missed the short stack where I came back, shame on you. Go listen to it right now. Yes. And tonight we are going to tell an untold story of history. Honestly, tonight's episode is a partially told story of history. If I talk about the Stonewall Inn and the first Pride Parade, you probably have a vague idea of what I'm talking about. But what started the uprising? Who led the uprising?
I don't know.
And how?
What were they uprising about?
Well, you'll learn tonight. Welcome to the show. So,
I'm sorry, is that like our third welcome tonight?
yeah.
I was like, welcome to the show. How many times can we say it?
If you didn't feel welcome, just know you are so welcome here. This is Showtime
Thank you for
Time.
joining us today. We actually really appreciate it.
Hello and welcome to Chill Time Happy Time. I'm Rosie.
Don't make fun of my smooth jazz voice.
So, when we talk about National Pride Month today and the multitude of pride parades that happen around the country each summer, they're all about loving yourself and being who you are, whether that's straight, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, asexual, or more. Pride is all about loving yourself, being proud of who you are, and more importantly, it's about loving others and loving them as they are. That is exactly what the Stonewall Inn uprising and the first Pride Parade in New York were about, but the atmosphere surrounding them was very different than the one we know today. The 1960s and the preceding decades were not welcoming or accepting times for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans.
Now, can I just... The 60s were when everyone was like free loving and druggy, right?
Welcome
So then why wouldn't it they be open, right? Isn't that like a whole thing about the 60s? Everyone was getting freaky and like doing all that crazy sex stuff, and so I just wouldn't think anyone would care.
Can
No,
I
absolutely.
speak to that? Yeah. So I checked out a documentary called The Rejected, which was the first homosexual documentary allowed to air in the USA in California in 1961.
Go California.
Right, go
California.
California, always ahead. But even as ahead as they were still, behind with it, because this is something that in America was culturally just unaccepted for a very long time. In a lot of ways, it unfortunately still is in a lot of parts of the world. But so they open up this documentary with a sort of like almost like a Twilight Zone narration and some really like spooky kind of music, and it sets like a dark tone. And the first questions that they raise, and I quote, are, what is homosexuality? What causes it? And is there a cure? So this is something that was literally seen and treated as an illness, and like the country, because it was so stigmatized, I think spent a lot of time kind of
Absolutely.
trying to get on board with it,
Another thing, too, is that the free love movement was not greatly accepted by the government and police, and they were trying to get rid of the free love movement.
Okay.
So because of that, things that were associated with the free love movement, such as exploring sexualities, gender, as well as experimenting with drugs, festivals, and music, and all these different things, was incredibly stigmatized because the government was like, absolutely not. And they made it seem like if you explored these things or, were accepting of these things, you were wrong. And you also have to think about where we were coming out of with the 60s. We were coming out of the 1950s, which was mom, dad, at home, like, nuclear family, in what they thought was normal. They're like a man and a man, or a woman and a woman.
And was that still when the woman stayed home and was domestic and the man went out? Okay.
It's 2020. We still have, themes of that in our modern day life now. So imagine how it was, 5 years after that.
When it was socially.
But the counterculture of the 60s, especially with the hippies, it's what made them such a counterculture and so relevant, is that just everything they did started to tear down these fabrications made by really the U.S. government and our society. I mean, it was literally a mental illness to be a homosexual person back in the day.
It was even considered. It was even
illness.
considered a physical, like biological illness. Like literally, one of the questions is there a cure?
Right. But in
crazy.
the 60s, you start to see all these artists and all these people, practicing free love and experimenting with, each other. And
challenging the culture that existed.
Exactly.
Always,
all of a sudden, it starts to fall.
The tenacity of the human spirit, man, you can't hold it back.
So to your point, Abby, it's really the culture that you see in the 1960s rising that eventually in 1969 leads to the Stonewall riot and the movement as we know it. But for the reason of society not being very accepting at this time, members of the LGBT community often took refuge in these so-called gay bars. These gay bars were found in larger American cities, and these bars allowed LGBT individuals a place of refuge to express themselves freely outside of a society that repressed their existence. These gay bars first became popular in the United States during the 1920s, so they've been around, and they continue to exist in our society today. Many gay bars were only open to cis-acting homosexual men at first. However, the rise of the social liberation movement in the 1960s, as we discussed, is what led to many of these bars beginning to welcome drag queens, in addition to individuals who identified as lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, often referred to as transvestites during that time. It's not a term we use today for sure.
Very outdated.
But anyway, these bars began, as a result of this culture to flourish as community centers for the LGBT community. However, sadly, they were immediately met with challenge from law enforcement.
Yeah.
Like Rosie said, many people were, they felt challenged or were uncomfortable, certainly institutions like the government, people that elected these politicians, they felt challenged by the rising of, a same-sex, love culture, just the idea of expressing love on a broader term than male and female for sure, and gender identity, being
God,
expressed.
Christianity really fucked this country up. God, honestly,
Bold
you know what I mean?
statement.
It did. It
Abby.
really
Fucked up
did.
a lot of the world in a lot of ways,
Fucked up
man.
so much shit.
Do you guys
I'll
watch
say
that
this.
Family Guy episode where Christianity never existed in an alternate universe and they're thousands of years ahead technologically?
Right.
Was it great? Was it fantastic?
It's like, you ever see that meme where it's the picture of the utopian future with flying cars and big silver highways, and it's society if MTV never existed.
MTV set us far back.
God bless.
Why would you guys say things so controversial yet so brave?
Well, I'll say this. There are many Christians out there today. One that I try to be myself, that really believe that Jesus' love extends to everyone, However, we've definitely seen, I would argue, a institution of Christianity over time that is certainly, run with certain values they find in the Bible and really, put their stick in the mud to make sure they're enforced in society.
Did you know the Catholic Church had an army in the 17th century?
Yeah.
A Catholic army.
Yeah. I mean, they fought.
Think about
crusades,
that. Think about that phrase.
Earlier.
Yeah,
That phrase.
that's pretty crazy.
Could you imagine if our local church just had a militia ready to go just for holy crusades?
Hey, man,
I
that
think
shit's
there's
going
some
on
churches
places
in our
America.
town that do have a militia.
That happens some places in America.
Yeah,
man.
unfortunately, you're not wrong.
Mass in arms.
Oh, man.
So anyway, back to, the gay bars that were existing in the 1920s for the LGBT community. Some of the first, the immediate law enforcement challenges they faced were that the New York State Liquor Authority penalized and shut down establishments that were serving alcohol to people that were known or suspected to be LGBT, arguing that the mere gathering of homosexuals was disorderly, their quote.
Their power would grow too strong.
Right.
we can't let them gather. They'll become too powerful.
And
It's over 9,000.
Yeah, honestly.
Thanks to activist efforts, these regulations were overturned in 1966. Despite this win in the legal world, same-sex relationships were still deemed illegal in many places, and therefore police constantly raided these gay bars to arrest anybody caught or suspected in engaging in homosexual activities.
Could you imagine? Sorry, I'm just thinking, the cop goes in and he's like, "Oh, I didn't know this place was a gay bar. I've been coming here all the time." And they're like, "Hey, we know you." Oh, Bob, what are you doing doing?
Well, I mean, like,
I didn't know I was gay.
but I mean, like, just think about the humanity, like, just that exists in all of us, you know, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, if you're a cop, you're straight, you're gay, whatever. Like, I wonder if at any time any of these cops that were on, like, the moral police force that they called it, or what was it? It was like the moral task force. But I wonder if at any time they went to any of those places and they were like, this is kind of a cool vibe.
This is a fine establishment.
This is okay. Why
Can
are
I
we...
speak to your manager? You guys, I just want to say, phenomenal job. Sorry about, we got to rate you, but phenomenal job.
Isn't it like universally known that like gay bars are way more fun than normal bars? Like that's a thing,
Well,
right?
today it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, police were literally raiding these bars and like literally arresting people if they caught them, you know, dancing with a same-sex partner, or if they were just suspected of being homosexual. Being there was enough for a suspect, of course.
That mustache is a little suspect.
Right,
We're gonna
right.
take you in.
Hey, what are you saying about people with mustaches, Abby?
You have a beard too. It doesn't count.
Yeah, I used to just have a mustache, though.
So anyway, many of the gay bars were also operating without liquor licenses, which is another easy target for police. And the reason for this was that at the time, serving the LGBT community was still seen as suspect and criminal. Therefore, few tax-paying business owners engaged with the LGBT community. Interestingly enough, as a result, various mafia organizations would purchase and operate gay bars, seeing an opportunity to make a buck off of serving the underserved community. So in 1966, the same year that the New York Liquor Authority had its anti-LGBT regulations overturned, the Genovese crime family purchased the Stonewall Inn, a so-called straight bar at the time. They renovated it and reopened it next year as a gay bar in the famous Greenwich Village of Manhattan.
A mob did, or
Yep.
wow.
Wow. How cool of them. How cool.
Absolutely.
How cool of the
the mob.
Genoveses.
That's the thing is I know people are like, oh, they were in it for the money, but like, how woke of them.
Yeah,
Like,
they were in it for the money, but they also were kind of like
They were like,
whatever.
hey, Donnie, you know what sells? Civil rights.
I gotta say, something I think is a really interesting parallel between the story of, LGBTQ rights and civil rights is that liquor licenses were used to keep people of color down in this country for a long time. In fact, there was this school that was bringing together people for civil rights causes and kind of training them in nonviolence and peaceful protest movements. And this was back in like the 1930s and 40s. And this school got raided by like some Tennessee police, of course, and shut down, unfortunately, because there was a racist law enforcement in power at the time, of course. And something that they charged people with was serving alcohol illegally because people of color could not be served at white establishments that served liquor, and liquor licenses weren't given to black business owners. So this school, what the white people would do that worked at the school is they'd buy a bunch of, beer, liquor, whatever, and they'd keep it in there, and they'd run like their own little liquor store so that people of color could drink too, because everybody needs a damn drink at
it's
the
so
end of the day,
how the government
right?
purposefully
The power-
puts laws in place to put people down. Like it's a damned if you do, damned if
the
you don't.
crack
And it's sick.
cocaine thing. I mean, that example right there. Yeah.
The power of merriment is a really curious thing, because if you think about it, through almost all times in at least at least like American history, I'm thinking of 3 times specifically when civil liberties are infringed upon. It's merriment and it's like alcohol that brings people together, interestingly enough. Just gathering, like the speakeasies that popped up when Prohibition was going on, the story you just told, the Genovese family buying a gay bar, like, or buying a bar and turning into a gay bar, yeah.
But also marijuana too. I mean, marijuana was just demonized because it was seen as something that only people of color did. But as John Mulaney says in a Netflix special, I believe, it's always been legal for white people, right? Like, it has been.
Unfortunately.
Seriously.
When did Reefer Madness come out? Was that the 70s?
30s, I think.
30s.
That was early.
That's way
40s,
early.
maybe.
Yeah.
That was the
That was
beginning
way
of it.
back.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
back then, that's when they started demonizing, and then it just went
I think I thought the 70s because of that episode of that 70s show where they make fun of Reefer Madness and they do that. You remember that?
Well, yeah, the 70s was like a big come out. That was the counterculture. Same thing we were talking about with the 60s continuing on.
Yeah.
And it all starts falling, and everybody's like, oh shit. In the words of Jonah Hill, weed is tight. Right?
We just tight.
Right. So back to the story with the Genovese family. They registered the Stonewall Inn as a type of private bottle bar, which did not require a liquor license to operate because the patrons were expected to bring their own liquor.
It's like BYOB.
It was BYOB. However, here's where you do start to see the darker side of the Genovese family, taking advantage of the fact that they're serving a underserved community. So first what they do, which is actually a protective order, is they bribe New York City's 6th precinct to ignore the activities occurring within the club, right? Because same-sex relationships, serving without a liquor license, they were serving alcohol anyway.
Lot of no-nos going on.
Money makes you suddenly really
Makes the world go round.
tolerant.
Makes it click.
Capitalism.
So, without this police interference, the family could cut corners how they saw fit. For example, the club lacked a fire exit. It had no running water behind the bar, it lacked clean toilets that didn't routinely overflow, and it served drinks that were watered down beyond recognition.
Wow.
Even more so, the mafia family reportedly blackmailed the club's wealthier patrons who wanted to keep their sexuality a secret.
Oh,
So they
shit.
did benefit from serving the LGBT
So they're
community.
not so nice.
There goes
Yep.
the wokeness we dubbed the Genovese
The
family
picture's
with.
always pretty on the surface, isn't it?
Right. Well, you can't
Yep.
trust the mob to be good-hearted, right?
I
Like,
guess.
It's about, right, I mean,
It's about money.
making the buck, absolutely.
It's a front.
And you're oppressing a people doing it, right?
I mean, but you're
Sad,
oppressing them less than the society was, and that's sadly the rock and the hard place the LGBT community was stuck in the 1960s.
But what does that
Wait,
say
so,
that a crime syndicate could provide less oppression than their government?
Well, it's
Welcome
quite a bit,
to the
doesn't it?
I'm also
60s.
confused because you said it's a BYOB, but they're serving watered down liquor.
Well,
Why
they
don't they just bring
registered
their
it.
own?
They registered it as a BYOB, but they definitely wanted to make money serving alcohol.
So would they get mad when people brought in their own alcohol, or they're like they didn't even tell them?
I think
that
they were
wasn't an
allowed
option?
to. You know, it has to be an option. I mean,
I'm
unless
just
the mob
saying-
might mess with you. You know,
Right.
right?
I'm saying
Yeah, right.
I don't doubt there's a big goon at the front of the door breaking wine bottles. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad.
I'm a big guy, you know. My hands, I lose control of them sometimes.
Big Tony.
I hope the
Big
guy at the
Tommy,
front of the
oh, no.
bar was like Scottish, and you guys are just getting it brutally wrong.
Oh, there's a large bottle, isn't it?
So, despite all of these more shifty business practices of the family, the Stonewall Inn quickly becomes an important Greenwich Village institution for the LGBT community. Why? Well, it was large and relatively cheap to enter. It welcomed drag queens, who were still receiving a bitter reception at other gay bars and clubs at the time, and it was actually a nightly home for many runaways and homeless gay youth, who would often panhandle and shoplift to afford the entry fee. And it was one of the few, if not the only, gay bar left in the country that still allowed dancing among its patrons.
Yeah.
Wait, they made them stop dancing?
Most clubs did, yes.
Yeah.
For police safety.
Didn't they see Footloose? I know it didn't come
Yeah.
out yet, but you can't stop the people
But
from
again,
dancing.
that's merriment, right?
Yeah.
It's keeping
Absolutely.
people
Well, the
down.
thing that's interesting too that you said about, the cheap fee and all that, this was a time that, and unfortunately still happens today, but especially during this time, think of a person that says that they're gay and their family kicks them out. And,
Yeah.
the only solace they have is being able to go to this bar. This is the only warm place maybe they'll have that night, where they could just dance and drink and just be happy, and
Absolutely.
be themselves.
And
And,
it's
be
like,
free.
for a minute.
and I didn't realize that a lot of them weren't able to dance. I mean, it's almost like it's even beyond oppression of just LGBTQ plus people, but it's like also just oppression of the human fucking spirit.
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
let the people dance.
They want to dance.
Let them move their bodies and wriggle around. Like,
Can you imagine one of them's like snapping their fingers and like tapping their toe, and the bar guy's like, "Stop that,
Jerry,
no more."
that's a rhythm.
whoa.
Well, when same-sex marriage was finally legalized in all 15 states in 2015, there was this famous saying that Barack Obama said on the White House lawn on the day of that occasion, where he said, this freedom makes us all a little more free. And there's that thought about, like you say, not even being able to dance, even if it's just a guy friend, that's something guys do today, when they're drunk, they don't care. It's 2020.
Yeah.
They get married, I mean.
But in right, absolutely. But in 1960, 1969, absolutely not, no same-sex dancing allowed, except for at the Stonewall Inn. So despite these shady practices, like Rosie said, many people of the LGBT community didn't have a home, and this was their home. So, despite the bribes of the Genovese family to the police raids were still a common occurrence, and in fact, they had to happen at the Stonewall Inn, kind of to detract attention from the fact that they'd been paid off. However, corrupt cops that the family had paid off would often warn them before the raids would occur. So this allowed the family to hide the illegal alcohol sales and the other illegal activities of the time, the same-sex dancing, same-sex relationships, etc., before the police arrived. This way they stayed out of trouble. So under these circumstances, the Stonewall Inn was able to keep its patrons out of trouble and flourish as a center for the LGBT community. It was a place where patrons felt safe to be themselves. But this all changed in the early morning hours of June 28, 1969. This time, without any warning, 9 policemen entered the Stonewall Inn, arrested the employees for selling alcohol without a license, roughed up many of its patrons, cleared the bar, and, in accordance with a New York State criminal statute that authorized the arrest of anybody not wearing at least 3 articles of gender-appropriate clothing, they took several people into custody after taking them into the bathroom to check for their biological sex. It was a third...
Wow.
As if check their genitals.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And apparently there are accounts of the police, unfortunately, like, not harassing, but, like, being a bit inappropriate with, like, the women and...
You know that got out of hand.
Okay.
You know there was a lot of officers
Of
that have
course.
used that and harassed
I
people.
mean, and that is a legal avenue to humiliate somebody and to totally violate the liberty they have over their body. I mean, that is the
And just-
worst type of oppression.
Just imagine that,
could
you know,
exist.
imagine you're a homeless youth who, you know, told his parents that you're gay and you get kicked out and next thing you know, you're being harassed by a police officer or forced to show your genitals.
You
Like,
feel unwanted
it's-
everywhere you go.
It's degrading, it's dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly sad that this had to not had to happen, but that this did happen in history.
I mean, we live in a country that was originally founded on the principle of people being able to live in a way where their civil liberties would not be infringed upon and they wouldn't be able to infringe on others. You know, it was just a theory of live and let live, you know, don't
mind your own business.
mind
and
your own
I'll
business,
mind
I'll
my
mind
business.
mine. And it got so out
But
of hand.
We
This-
got in each other's business.
yeah. In this case,
big
though,
time.
Danny, what happened?
Right. So, in this instance, there was actually an upscale in action in the village that week. This was the third such raid on a Greenwich Village gay bar that week. And normally when these raids occurred, the bar patrons would scatter and disperse, hoping to avoid police arrest. The LGBT community was largely viewed by society as a weak and passive group during this time, who would flee from a problem rather than confront it. And the police expected this from the patrons of the Stonewall Inn on the night of June 28th. Instead, they met a crowd of patrons who were fed up with being perpetually harassed for being themselves. Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
That literally happened. I did watch
This is a group
My
of-
Drunk History, and they were like, "There's 500 of us. What are they gonna do?"
This is a group of patrons that, like, one of them listened to, like, the early inklings of Green Day. Like, they got the angst in them, and they were like, "No, we're taking them on."
They just like looked around and they're like, "Oh God, I wish we could do something." And then they like really looked and they're like, "Holy shit, we can do something."
Yeah.
So the accounts of who started the so-called riot, it's still not clear to this day. It was sometime between 1 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. on that early Saturday morning where many of the patrons were intoxicated, still living out their Friday nights, as many of us have
drunk
done.
power. The power you have when you're drunk. Oh,
Oh,
my
yeah.
God. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
It's the one thing that's stronger than little boy confidence.
There's drunk gay people in the 60s.
Little Anakin puts down his lightsaber. He can't
Yeah, right. They even beat a Jedi.
He's like, "Power to you guys! Like, good job."
May the force be with you.
So these patrons, they watched their friends, family, and romantic partners get beaten up by the police and dragged into police cars. Many of the patrons that night have since asserted that the uprising began when a scuffle broke out with a woman in handcuffs. The woman, Storme de Larverie, was roughly escorted from the door of the bar to the awaiting police wagon. She was brought through the crowd by the police several times as she escaped repeatedly.
Badass.
Yeah.
Nice.
She fought with at least 4 of the police, swearing and shouting for about 10 minutes. Described by a witness as a typical New York City butch, she had been hit on the... Yeah. More common use during the time. Yeah.
Imagine that in court. Like, could you define typical New York street butch? Can you tell me what that means, officer?
Well, she was quite the hard ass. You know, I have a lot of respect for her. She had been hit on the head by an officer with a baton, and for as one witness stated, announcing that her handcuffs were too tight. That's why he hit her on the head with the baton. And she was bleeding from a head wound as she was fighting back. Bystanders recall the woman sparking the crowd to fight when she looked at the bystanders and shouted, "Why don't you guys do something?"
Hell yeah.
Help me out
You know
here.
what that kind of reminds me of in the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? They asked one of the guys, they prompted them, like, "Okay, guys, what's a great line to start a fight?" And one guy just goes out, he's like, "Who wants to start a fight?"
That's awesome.
So, after an officer picked her up, they picked her up after she made the statement, heaved her on into the back of the wagon, the crowd became a mob at this moment and went berserk. It was at that moment that the scene became explosive. Many attendees credit Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman of color and a drag queen, as throwing the first brick at police officers. In 1987, Johnson refuted this claim, saying that she didn't arise till later, saw the building on fire, and people rioting. But many others do contest that it was her brick throw that inspired them, and the police began to get hit by a swarm of glass bottles, mugs, and building debris.
I didn't mean to start all that. I just came up and the building was on fire.
Isn't that funny that she's like, I didn't do that? Everybody's like, you did it.
You had us fired up that night.
You know what you did, girl.
So at one point, this scene gets out of control. The police that are there, they do not have control of the situation.
Little bitches.
Yeah. So they're able to barricade themselves inside the bar at one point with the prisoners.
Wait, the police went inside the bar?
Yeah.
What? Oh, how the tables have turned.
Right. Well, basically,
Arrest
what happened,
them.
if you can kind of see the, picture the crowd movement.
Yeah.
is they're carrying
Arrest
people
them
out
and-
to the cars, so the people come out of the bar and start throwing things at them.
So then they're like, oh, there's less people in the bar, so we go.
yeah.
Bartender, arrest them and get me a gin and tonic while you're at it.
They already arrested the bartenders. Nobody was on their side here. Because you have to remember, this bar was operating illegally. So at one point, the police are able to get into the bar and they barricade themselves there and they call for reinforcements. The angry crowd broke through the barricade several times, pushing it back, and at one point, the bar was set on fire. To this day, nobody knows who started the fire. And while many of the accounts of the night have been factually contested by others who were present, all of the patrons agree. That night of June 28th, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn, there was a collective uprising, a coming together of the LGBT community on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village, where the oppressed community stood together and said enough is enough.
Nice.
Wow.
There's
Now-
so much. Yeah, sorry.
Now, wouldn't I think what you're saying here is that they all agreed that we didn't start the fire.
But it was always burning.
Since the world's been turning. That's
I was
awesome.
just gonna
No
say,
more, we're going to get copyrighted.
this is one of those moments in history where there's so much symbolism. I mean, police just raiding these institutions and making people feel uncomfortable, with themselves and their bodies and their sexuality. That's a total violation of like private space, right? Like these police are invading a place and they're, doing that to people. And this group of people is pushed outside and they take over a very public space, the streets, the beat that the cops walk. And they say, no, enough is enough. And as somebody, we've got family who's been in law enforcement. We have family currently in law enforcement. And, you don't want violence. You don't want these things to happen. But when there's oppression going on, hell yeah, you root for those protesters, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Hell yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, shit. It's just so... I don't even know where I was going with
It's
that.
crazy
I had an
how
idea, but I
far
forgot
we've
it.
come. That's
Yes, it
really
is.
not that long ago.
Yeah.
I
50
mean,
years about.
Yeah.
Well,
And we
one
really...
this year.
Definitely. And we look at this moment, this one uprising in the middle of a early Saturday morning, a Friday night, as the beginning of the modern LGBT rights movement as we know it. The Stonewall Riot, as it was called, received attention the next day from the New York Times and the Village Voice. This sent its actions around the country and around the world. But as Stormé DeLarverie was quoted saying, it was a rebellion. It was an uprising. It was a civil rights disobedience. But it wasn't no damn riot.
now I wonder if it wouldn't have happened if they were sober. Like I genuinely wonder how much them all being trashed like
Strong
really
confidence,
played
right?
it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
I
tonight's
mean-
the night. No one's
I
telling
mean,
me
like
how.
I'd join a
I think
riot
at
if
some
I was
point-
drunk enough.
If it didn't happen then, it would have happened.
It would have
different-
because
Yeah, it would have.
because with when you're literally oppressed and pushed down like that, I mean, it's like raising a dog, man. If you let that dog get an inch and get another inch and just keep being a brat and being a jerk, if you let the cops keep beating your friends up, it's going to get worse and worse and worse until you do something. I'm not inciting riot. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. At
At
some
some
point,
point.
almost like a civil disobedience had to happen, or
Right.
Yeah.
an action had to be taken to push against the actions that the cops were doing against this unfortunately very suppressed community.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was probably like 90% of the people at this riot. Like they had, this is something that oppression they'd been dealing with repeatedly for like years in their life.
Their
and they
entire
were
life,
ready.
yeah.
And the
But-
other 10% were just like homeless people that are just like, hey, I'm
Or
riot.
I'm thinking the other 10%, maybe they're just like a friend of somebody who often frequents Stonewall, and they're like, this was their first night there, and they're just really drunk, and they see this uprising going on. They're like, yeah, you know what? I worked all damn week. I'm not having the cops ruin my Friday night. Yeah. Let's throw the brick. Let's join the fight.
There was
Mob
actually
mentality.
A professor of mine. Actually, I spoke about him in the last Untold history episode. He actually like frequented Stonewall with his friends, and like I guess some of his friends were like involved in stuff. And I just remember him being like, "Yeah, man, like
That's
Yeah, man.
crazy.
like,
Sometimes.
there are like supportive people that were probably there that were like, yeah, just
Good human
do it.
being.
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, you guys. I think we are going to head into a quick break here. We're going to fill up our beverages a little bit, take a pee break, the things we always do on break, and we'll come right on back for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
I'm gonna break a mirror with a shot glass.
Welcome back from break.
What?
Welcome back, everybody.
We've all been watered.
Jake is making fun of a voice that I made a minute ago.
JD was telling me how to do the welcome back, and he goes, "Welcome back from break." So I felt it very fitting to welcome you all back from our break that way.
I think
Thank
we
you
need
for sharing
a
that.
second thing recording of like our conversations before we come back from the break because it's usually us just cracking up at one another.
If we end up wearing mics 24 hours a day, I'm going to get in trouble at some point.
If we
Oh,
worked mics
terrible
24
trouble.
hours a day, everyone's gonna realize how gassy I am.
Let's put one near your butt.
So anyway, hey guys, welcome back. The reason we're here tonight is to talk about Pride.
Wait, we're not here to talk about Rosie's farts?
No, but I mean,
No.
we can talk
I'm
about
leaving.
both. There's room for both. Don't be close-minded.
No, we're still talking
But we're
about
here
pride.
for Pride, yes.
Absolutely. And right before break, if you missed it, we were talking about the Stonewall riot, the Stonewall uprising, and how it led in a uprising against the police. Now, eventually, police did arrive with reinforcements, and they were able to put out the fire on the building and disperse the crowd of the uprising that night on June 28th. However, from that point forward, the police were not going to be able to silence the LGBT community. A string of spontaneous protests and demonstrations against these police raids on gay bars broke out that week on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. Each protest grew in numbers. For the first time in U.S. history, the LGBT community came out of hiding. They were passionate, outspoken, demanding of their civil rights, and getting more organized by the day.
Hell freaking yeah.
Woo! Now, they were inevitably inspired by the other movements of the 1960s that led to this moment. Think of the African American Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, and the Feminist Movement, all which drastically changed American society throughout the 1960s and 70s. So the LGBT community took note from them and began organizing civil disobedience demonstrations, freedom marches, and legal fights to win their guarantee of liberty and justice for all in the United States.
That's the big
That's
step.
the Pledge of
Big step.
Allegiance that you just said.
They're citing the.
Oh my gosh.
But seriously, the big step for any group that was really gotten equal protection law to, go in their favor in this country has started as protest and moved to a legal movement. It has to go to law. It has to go to the courts. It has to be written.
Yeah, because if it doesn't, it'll just be noise, constant noise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. But at first, with these marches, these freedom marches that multiple movements did, the African American Civil Rights Movement, these marches, you have to make noise, these civil disobedience, these sit-ins, that the African American community did in segregated diners to protest that, you have to make a noise to say, until there is justice in our legal system, there will not be peace in the community, and yet do it in such a nuanced way where you're not harming people, as to where, people can only gain respect for your movement and gain hatred if they choose to oppose it. Right? Absolutely. And that's something that, Martin Luther King did really well leading the African American community through the civil rights movement, and something you definitely see start to happen in the LGBT community after Stonewall. So on June 28th, 1970, 1 year after the uprising at the Stonewall Inn, they had the first Pride Parade. Woo!
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
It was titled the Christopher Street Liberation Day March, and it took Manhattan by storm as the LGBT community paraded through the city to declare their existence and their need for civil rights to the world. While this was not, right?
I gotta say, the Christopher Street thing, not as catchy as Pride Parade.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It was a start,
Yeah, I'm glad
the
they
marketing
streamlined
point of it
that.
yet.
Right. We've all seen the
didn't have
pilot episode,
advertising.
right? Of the show.
Yeah.
Like, the characters change after everything gets more flashy.
Yeah.
So this actually, interesting fact, this was not the first LGBT march in American history, but it was the first of its kind for sure.
When was the first?
Well, the first actually started occurring.
Thanks for asking.
So the first started occurring in the 1950s, the late 50s, and the Mattachine Society, a gay men's rights organization founded in the 50s, held these marches. But there were noticeable differences. The marchers had to be silent. They had to wear gender-conforming clothes, and there could be no public display of affection allowed. So after the Stonewall
I hate
uprising,
you. I hate you. I hate you.
well, you know, they wanted to seem.
They didn't probably want to cause too much
Yeah.
stirring.
And can I ask something there? Because earlier in the episode, you were talking about how, like, I think you said Stonewall, maybe it was just gay bars in general, were first only open to, like, cis acting white men, pretty much.
Yep.
It's very interesting to see the way the LGBT community and the movement grew to be so inclusive and to be such a big tent and to welcome in, like, you know, non-gender conforming persons and things like that. Because, like, you know, it is like, you know, you're talking about these 1950 people marching, you know, very conformed, you know, gender normative clothing, very silent. They don't want to be too disruptive. They just want people to respect them in the society.
Yep.
But I mean, this grew, and there wasn't, at least the way you're telling the story, it doesn't seem like there was resistance to letting these people join the movement. There wasn't that, you know, internal hatred. It was kind of, you know, I'm wondering, how did it get there?
Right. Well, I mean, I think, you know, when Abby talked earlier about the counterculture of the 1960s, the free love movement, you know, these people began socializing with each other. These people that were considered outsiders of society, that had, you know, before in the 1950s hidden away in their rooms, were now at Woodstock together, you know, doing experimental drugs and talking about the real problems.
Woodstock.
Right? And I think there's something to be said for, you know, groups that are being oppressed for similar reasons, you know, whether you're gay being oppressed for your sexual, you know, your sexual orientation, or you are transgender being oppressed for your gender identity, you're more or less being held out of society for the same reasons, right?
Right.
And you realize there's that strength in numbers. If we stand together, you know, they can stop us and us, but they can't stop us together.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you said Woodstock, that just reminded me. Do you guys remember last year they were supposed to do the 50th anniversary? Like they were going to do a Woodstock.
And it
like,
floundered.
Yeah. Wow.
That's so sad, isn't it?
It is. It is and it isn't. I
They
didn't want to
didn't
see
even have
Miley.
COVID.
It was like Miley Cyrus and
Oh,
like
Miley
Jay-Z
Cyrus.
and like because
It was pretty
it's-
poppy.
And they weren't going to hold it at where it was happening, right?
Because Bethel, they weren't going to do it at Bethel, and that's the
Yeah.
original site. They were going to do it somewhere else. That was weird. It's
Like,
good
weren't
that
they
it
gonna try and
floundered.
do it? I can't remember. Were they going to do it in the town of Woodstock
Yeah,
or something? I think that's what it was. But that's
they
not
kept
where,
losing permits.
That's not where Woodstock happened.
Yeah.
And now to get back to the story real
Sorry.
quick, I just wanna throw out a little bit of a devil's advocate here, because, you know, while we're telling the story of the good things that were happening for this movement, it still had its opposition. I mean, it still even unfortunately has its opposition today.
Yes, it does.
And in the late 60s, in 1969, Time magazine published this, which I'm going to quote for you, just to show some of the sharp opposition that the movement was still receiving. So, and I quote, "A few months after Stonewall, Time magazine writes, the homosexual subculture is, without question, shallow and unstable. This was not a new position for the magazine. In 66, it published a piece that said, even in purely non-religious terms, homosexuality represents a misuse of the sexual faculty."
Boo.
I know,
Kidding
right? The piece argued that homosexuality is a pathetic little second-rate substitute for reality, a pitiable flight from life.
Ouch.
Time magazine, you know,
Time
you trust them.
magazine calling them out. I mean, it was the
Wow.
60s, but still.
Absolutely.
And they added that it deserves no encouragement, no glamorization, no rationalization, no fake status as minority martyrdom, no sophistry about simple differences in tastes, and above all, no pretense that it is anything but a pernicious sickness.
Imagine
Oh my
thinking you're
God.
so superior to other people that you could actually write garbage like that.
Yeah, what a
in
pretentious
frickin-
fuck.
Seriously.
Yeah, what a pretentious fuck. I mean,
Like that actually, that makes me angry.
But a
I'm
lot
very
of people,
upset right
you know,
now.
a lot of people at the time agreed with him. And, you know, it makes us all upset. But I think, you know, when you have to give more credit to these people that were out there at the first marches,
Definitely.
this wasn't the 50th Pride Parade that we saw in 2018. You know, this wasn't Madonna streaking, you know, with a bunch of different stars to say Happy Pride and everyone's in the streets loving each other. You know, it wasn't popular. It was bold and it was scary. It was putting your life and identity and your job on the line. And these people still did it.
Wow, I can't even
Yeah.
imagine going to a parade and, you know, putting yourself out there. Maybe your family doesn't know or, you know, your work doesn't know, and going there and just saying, this is who I am, you know.
it's a
Yeah,
crazy
it's amazing.
plight. I mean, I can't imagine. I have never felt a time in my life where I have felt that like my career or my family life were on the line based on my gender identity, my sexual orientation, anything like that. And I guess that I'm lucky for that. And it's just, man, it's so rough to just think about the people in the world that have had to and are still going through these things.
It's. I mean, with this administration, I mean, the LGBTQ rights are definitely at risk, and we need to make sure we protect them.
Sure. And, outside of the United States, there are places, where you're still thrown off a building if it's found out that you are gay.
Oh my God, yeah, like places
Iran,
in Africa.
absolutely,
Yeah.
Well, and that's why something you said earlier that President Obama said when Obergefell, the decision came through and gay marriage was legalized, and he said we're all a little bit freer. These offenses to people, it should be that we all think about that. We all think beyond, and, we think, some people literally have to wake up and just who they are that day puts a target on their back, from their state, from their family, from their friends. So, we are all a little bit freer, and attacks on liberties and freedoms everywhere are attacks on all of us. So, don't take that lightly. Don't be a bystander to it, These people that threw those bricks, God bless them. They started something that needed to happen probably a long time ago. So
being homophobic is not okay, and you can't justify it by your religion. That's not a justification. It's the same with racism. It's never okay.
Yeah.
And
nowhere in the Bible does it say anywhere about you should just hate people because...
But you know what it does say? It says to, like Jesus said, love thy neighbor. You should
love thy neighbor.
Be loving the people.
Well, right.
And I'm not love, go hang out in his bed and be best friend. No, but accept people for who they are. Accept
Absolutely.
that not everyone is going to have the same beliefs as you, and accept that this is the way that people live their lives. This is who they are. Yeah. Please leave them alone and let them live their lives.
Mind your business.
That's why I know Abby loves to hit on Christianity, but Jesus was cool as shit. Straight up. The book of Leviticus was homosexuality is an abomination. Jesus comes in with his sandals and he's like, love thy neighbor,
Listen,
y'all.
my grandma...
Jesus was cool as shit.
Jesus came in, he was like, all right, that last chapter got pretty weird.
Listen,
let me tell you what the father said.
My grandma in a meditation met Jesus in a past life. And she said that he was pretty cool and very nice.
He was a little turtle.
Listen, I'm not saying that he's not a person,
but the repercussions of misinterpretations of things associated with the religion have of course made people very close.
I know when you hit on Christianity, you're hitting on institutionalized Christianity that has been used to oppress people and wage wars throughout history.
Big time.
Looking at you, medieval times.
Yeah, Jesus was cool
Catholic
though.
Army.
Jesus as a philosopher and an individual and a religious figure was cool.
Yeah. So I love this podcast. I love this group that we work with because we can start talking about a march and we end up talking about how Jesus was just a little turtle. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get a turtle now.
A cool ass little turtle. You ever see Franklin the turtle, that 90s cartoon?
Hey, it's Franklin coming over to play.
Hold on,
That's Jesus reborn. Yeah. Copyright.
We haven't finished the story quite yet.
Sorry.
Oh, you're okay. So we go back to the organizing of the first Pride Parade in Manhattan. So as I said, the Mattachine Society was having these more rigid marches. Silence. No public display of affection, wear gender conforming clothes. These were designed to not threaten society. They didn't want people to feel uncomfortable with what they were seeing. So after the Stonewall uprising, a few months later, the Mattachine Society throws their march in 1969 in Philadelphia. And a lot of people go to it and they agree, this is bullshit now. The game has changed. That's the attitude in the air.
Yeah.
So they go to a meeting of different groups in the northeastern region of the United States, that are, at the time it was called, they were called homophile organizations, which already just bears a little more of a, negative connotation.
Right.
But these groups are really, they're the beginning of the LGBT rights movement as we know it. These are the groups organizing to get things done. So the Eastern Regional Conference of the Homophile Organizations met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1969, and its members agreed that these rigid silent marches were not getting through to society and were no longer representative of the LGBT community.
Time to get loud.
Yeah. So in response, they scheduled an annual march to be held on the last Sunday in June in New York City to commemorate Stonewall. No silence was mandated, no dress code was enforced, and public displays of affection were allowed. The event was something thought unimaginable in the United States at the time. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals storming the streets in large crowds to declare their existence, their love for each other, and their need for civil rights. The march took New York City by storm, and after subsequent pride marches in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago that summer, it was clear. The LGBT movement was proud, passionate, and here to stay. So when we look at American society today, one that has legalized same-sex marriage across 50 states, and that offers the LGBTQ plus community full protection from discrimination in 21 out of our 50 states, it is hard to remember how oppressive our society was to LGBT Americans just decades ago. Now, of course, the oppression still lingers. There are 29 states that have yet to grant our community full protection.
29 states.
Jeez.
Absolutely.
That's more than half.
Call them
More
out.
than
What
half.
states?
No. Well, actually, if you look at the sources on our website, that will be posted alongside this episode.
Yeah, check out our website, chilltimehappytime.com.
There's actually a map that will show you exactly what states offer which protection, whether it's public, private, both, or one only.
Oh.
Absolutely. Or none at all. There are states out there.
Right. Well, and this is another thing that, I mean, really mirrors the struggle for civil rights in this country. You know, people of color had to worry all the time through the South. I mean, there was literally different, I think it was called the Green Book. There was like travel guides telling you how you had to behave in certain states because you were not guaranteed to get out of that state alive if you behaved differently.
That's unbelievable.
You know, and, you know, it's not to that extent, of course, today with LGBT persons. Like, hopefully, you'd think if somebody obviously has a violent crime committed against them, they'd be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But still, I mean, to go to another state and have to worry about whether a hospital is going to provide you care, or to worry about whether you can work in that state if you have to travel for your job and not lose it in that state. I mean, those are things that are just outrageous, and those are those offenses to liberty that should piss us all off a little bit.
And that is the fight we still have to fight today. And yet, even though we still have that progress to go, I tell you, so many LGBT individuals today can never imagine living in a society as welcoming as ours now is. And while it has taken an army of bright-minded and passionate individuals to fight for those protections and rights our community enjoys today, we all owe it to those patrons of the Stonewall Inn, who on June 28, 1969, sent us a call to arms by standing together and saying enough is enough.
No, it was that girl on the ground that was like, fucking help me.
Do something. Crowd erupts.
Well, that's the story, folks.
Oh, how cool. Can I just add a few things real quick?
Oh, of course.
So that documentary that I brought up before, The Rejected, which was, again, it was the first homosexual documentary that was allowed to air in the USA. Dr. Margaret Mead, who is a famous anthropologist and associate curator of the American Museum of Natural History in New York at the time, she came on and did a piece that was really just brilliant. And honestly, like, I was looking at Rosie and I was like, that was like surprisingly woke for the time.
Yeah, there were some things, you know, I was sitting reading my, you know, comics as I usually do. And there were some things that even, like, she was able to pique my interest. I was like, did she?
It was 1961.
Did she just say that?
She made this speech in 1961, and so she said, I'm just going to give you a few highlights of some of the things that she said. She said that homosexuality is not a sensational trend specific to the United States. It is found in all cultures of all periods of time.
Looking at you, Time Magazine.
Looking at you, Time Magazine. She makes many points to show that homosexuality is actually quite natural throughout human history and is entirely dependent on the society, how they are received and treated.
Penguins.
Yes.
Need I say more?
Yeah. She brings up that there's American Indian tribes where she used the term transvestite. This is an outdated term. It's not something we say today, but to quote her accurately, I will be saying that term. She said there are American Indian tribes where the transvestites, who can do everything a man can do and everything a woman can do, is regarded as superior. Her speech goes on for a while, so I'm not going to give you the whole thing. But basically, one of the most striking things that she says is her whole kind of thesis is about how the reaction to homosexuality is entirely dependent on the society, looking at this historically. And she says, and I quote, "So as we look the world over, with all we know about people at each period in human history, we have to say that homosexuality is a potential of all human beings. That human beings are deeply bisexual, and bisexual at different periods in their maturation, and whether society is going to assign homosexual behavior in adolescence or to adulthood as being appropriate for some men and no women, or some women and no men, or to boo it all together and treat it as a crime and condemn those individuals with homosexual propensities, this is entirely a matter of culture. Society has set up the way that sex is to be lived, and it is within the power of each society to change their attitudes toward this question. In 1961, how woke is that?
So help me out here, just because there was a lot there.
Sorry.
If you had to say it in a tweet, sexuality is a spectrum, right?
Sexuality.
That is what I said.
That's literally it.
I wound up saying that to John. A lot of people, there's the whole idea that gender is, a broad spectrum. It's fluid, but sexuality can be too. And it's really interesting that in 1961 she was talking about this, because this is something that is regularly discussed in 2020, and it is a very woke way of thinking.
And I was almost like I was almost like alarmed to hear it. Not alarmed in a bad way, but like just it caught me off guard, because like I was saying earlier, if you watch the beginning of the documentary, it really lobs it up in a way where it's about to tell you the most terrifying story of all time.
It is.
That homosexuality is like scary, bad, and here's some ways that we can fight it. And then she comes in, Dr. Margaret Mead, and she's just like, listen. Like the Greeks used to love each other no matter what was dangling between their legs.
That's the thing, is it's a big cultural thing, and unfortunately in our society, especially during this time of the Stonewall riot uprising, whatever you want to refer to, unfortunately we were in a sort of oppressive society that did not let these people live their lives. Whereas it's literally proven in history in different cultures that these relationships and these ways of living were valid and were embraced, and they existed.
Definitely.
And it just shows what's happening in our society at that time, and still, unfortunately, to this day, I keep saying it. It's still something prevalent. Like there's something in our society that's like, no.
Right.
No.
Well, something I have to say, I love about what Dr. Mead said, and what you said, Rosie, as well, is that, sometimes when a group finds themselves in a society that is repressive, that literally, is taking legal action to make sure they can't exist, how do you stand up for yourself? How do you create that spark? And how do you change that society? Step by step, chipping away at that block in the legal cases that leads us to where we are today. With, while, homophobia and transphobia, they persist today, we undoubtedly in 2020 have a society that is much more just and much more, accepting of the LGBT community than we had in 1969. There is no doubt, and just to see that group show us how to, take that stand and make that progress is so important, especially in a year like 2020, where we can't have the Pride Parade because of COVID-19, And I say this is such an important year to take a look back and remember the history. Remember what got us from point A to point B, and how are we going to get to point C? And that's the next step.
How are we getting to point Z?
That's like 23 steps ahead.
No,
Hold
that's
on.
what I'm saying. Like, I want point Z. I
Girl,
want
slow
point
down.
Y.
We're getting to point C.
I'm
This
sorry.
is a 45 day, 1 point per day plan.
We're gonna come back with a
You're
plan.
definitely right. You are right, Danny. There's steps.
Let's work.
to be
Let's work
taken.
backwards. Day 45, go. No, what does he say? He's like, day 45, company saved. Day 44, go. Little Office reference for you.
Little Office reference.
I don't watch it. They all tell me I'm horrible for it, but what do I know?
We're gonna get him watching it one day.
Yeah. The more I watch it now, though, especially, with new eyes and everything, I'm like, wow, some of these jokes are so outdated. I'm like,
They are, a lot
you
of
couldn't, do that show now.
This is the stuff that was allowed, that could air, that was culturally allowed to air in
Yeah.
2010
There's actually,
even.
I don't remember what episode it is specifically, but there's an episode, when Michael goes into his office, and on the right-hand wall of the office that's adjacent to the wall of the conference room, he's got that little tiny cabinet shelf, and there's always books on top of it. There's one episode where he has Donald Trump's book facing front and center, and there's a shot where he goes in and you just see Trump in big letters, and I'm like, ooh, wow, what a
Yeah. Trigger.
yeah, trigger. Well, this has been a really awesome episode. Daniel, thank you so much for bringing this story to our attention.
And for coming back.
Yeah,
For
thanks
coming
for coming
back.
back.
Coming back.
Yeah.
Well, happy Pride Month, everybody.
Yeah, happy Pride.
Happy
I'm so
Pride.
sorry that, we can't all celebrate it the way that we want to because of the COVID-19 crisis. If you're listening and you want to interact with us, hit us up on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chilltime Happy Time. Even check us out on our website, chilltimehappytime.com. Let us know how you're celebrating Pride
Yeah,
in this
show
strange
us.
quarantine way.
Are you just being yourself and embracing yourself, or are you wearing some fun rainbow socks, or
I got rainbow socks.
wearing your sexuality flag around your shoulders? I know a lot of people were posting that on Facebook.
Yeah.
All their sexuality
everyone
flags.
coming in the the mail. It's great.
They were gonna
Nice.
do.
You can get one for free. You just have to pay shipping.
It
Or
was really
someone
sad. I
does.
actually saw someone.
I hate those. That sounds like such a scam to me.
It does.
It's free. Just pay shipping.
And it's
so
like
it's not free.
$6, so you're gonna shovel it out.
Yeah.
Right.
But I saw a really kind of like disappointing story of someone that like recently came out as like asexual to like their friends and family. They're like, and I got the flag, but now I can't go to Pride. And I was like,
Aw.
oh.
Well-
well, still wear it anyway.
We support you. We feel your pride.
We love you.
Yes, we
Be
love
proud.
you.
Just
Be
be
yourself.
proud.
Be yourself.
And if anybody tries to step on your civil liberties, throw a fucking brick into the wall. Start a
And set
damn
it
riot.
on fire.
Because we have as equal of rights as anyone else does.
Yes. Check us out on our socials, our website. Come back and check us out next week. And if you want to check out our sources, definitely head over to our website, chilltimehappytime.com. We'll be posting them in a thing there labeled episode 6 sources. No, this is 7 now.
This is
Episode
our
7.
lucky number
Episode-
7.
Holy crap!
Oh
Episode
my
7.
God.
Check
Wow,
us
thanks
out.
for listening this far.
Thanks for
guys.
if you're still there, thanks.
It's good to know we're not shouting into the void.
Yeah, I hope you're enjoying
Appreciate
this.
you.
I'm JD,
I'm Rosie.
I'm Danny.
I'm Abby.
I'm Jake.
and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.